Today, we're going to try and cut through some of the confusion around two terms you hear thrown around all the time: economic growth and economic development.
That's right. They sound similar, maybe, but they really point to different things. Politicians, economists, sometimes they use them interchangeably, and that can cause real problems.
So we've done our homework, looked at the core theories and models, trying to get a clear picture of how these two relate. Our goal today is pretty simple. To give you the tools to understand what actually drives progress, what lifts societies up.
Yeah, it's a critical distinction because if you just chase, quantitative growth, you might boost the GDP numbers but completely miss whether people's lives are actually getting better. That's not development.
Okay, let's unpack that right away then. Growth. That seems like the more straightforward one. It's about the numbers going up.
It is, fundamentally. Economic growth is quantitative, purely focused on measurable increases, usually in real national income or perhaps real per capita income over a decent stretch of time. Sustained increase.
So more output, more income.
Exactly. It's often the main focus in already advanced economies where, the basic structures are in place. Professor Meyer put it simply. It's the process where a country's real per capita income increases over a long period. Straightforward enough.
Right. So growth is about getting bigger, scale. Development, though, you called it growth plus changes. That sounds, bigger, more complex.
It absolutely is. Development is much broader, multidimensional. Yes, it includes those quantitative increases. You generally need growth for development. But the real heart of it is qualitative improvement, structural shifts.
Like social changes? Cultural ones.
All of the above. Social, cultural, institutional changes that fundamentally reshape the economy and society. It's not just about having a richer country in aggregate terms.
It's about a better quality of life for the people living there.
Precisely. Professor Todaro, MP Todaro, gave a really good definition. He described economic development as this multidimensional process. Big changes in social structures, attitudes, national institutions.
And this happens alongside growth.
Alongside accelerating growth, ideally. But crucially, Todaro stressed, it must involve reducing inequality and, the big one, eradicating absolute poverty. That's non-negotiable for true development.
And this term, development, it's more often applied to developing countries.
Generally, yes, because they often have significant untapped potential, unused resources, including human resources, that can be mobilized through these structural changes.
Okay, that sets the stage nicely. But whether we're aiming for just growth or this bigger goal of development, something has to drive it. What are the actual engines here? What factors make these changes happen?
Well, economists tend to group them. There are four main economic factors that usually come up. First, you got natural resources. Obvious, maybe, but it's about quantity, quality, how accessible they are, and crucially, how well they're utilized.
Okay, so having oil is one thing. Actually getting it out and using it productively is another.
Exactly. Resources are inert on their own. Which brings us to the second factor. Human resources. This is huge. It's the skills, the education, the technical know-how of your workforce. An illiterate, unskilled population really holds back efficiency.
Makes sense. You need engineers, managers, skilled workers.
Right. Third factor, capital formation. This is about increasing the stock of actual capital goods, things like factories, machines, roads, power grids, infrastructure.
And how does that happen? Where does the capital come from?
It requires investment. And investment typically requires savings. If a country doesn't save enough domestically to fund the needed investment, well, that's where external assistance or foreign investment might come into play.
Okay. Resources, people, capital.
What's the fourth? Technology. Absolutely vital. Think about innovation, research, and development. Technology helps overcome shortages, maybe in natural resources, and it's key to boosting productivity across the board, making both labor and capital more effective.
Those are the big economic levers.
Yeah.
But I remember the notes mentioning other things, sort of. Background factors, non-economic ones.
Yes. Context is crucial. These are things like the social structure, maybe a rigid caste system, for instance, the type of family structures common in the society. Racial factors, unfortunately, can play a role. And very importantly, government policies.
How do they fit in?
They kind of set the stage. They influence the investment climate. They shape incentives for education or starting a business. They affect how easily labor can move. These non-economic factors often determine the rate at which that economic engine can actually run, how fast you can grow or develop.
So the social fabric matters a lot. Okay, context set. Now, how do we track progress? The traditional yardstick is still per capita income, PCI, right?
It is. Historically, PCI has been the go-to measure for growth. Simple formula. Divide the total national income by the population. It gives you a rough idea of income per person or the average availability of goods and services.
And the key thing for you listening is that for growth to actually mean anything per person, national income has to grow faster than the population. Otherwise, you're just treading water.
That's the basic requirement, yes. But here's the twist. While PCI is necessary for tracking growth, it's widely seen as really insufficient for measuring genuine development. It has some pretty major blind spots.
Okay, what are they? Why isn't just looking at income per person good enough?
Three big problems, really. First, it completely ignores environmental costs. You could ramp up industrial output, pollute everything, deplete resources. PCI goes up, but the environment and people's health might be collapsing. It doesn't subtract that damage.
Right, growth at any cost.
What else? Second, it tells you nothing about distribution. National income could double, pushing PCI way up, but if all that new wealth went to the richest 1% while poverty actually increased for most people, well, that's not development, is it? PCI wouldn't show you that inequality.
Yeah, averages can hide a lot. And the third issue.
It includes unproductive or even socially harmful spending, building up a massive military or spending on things that don't actually improve well-being, like prisons, perhaps. That spending still adds to national income and boosts PCI, but it doesn't mean society is better off.
So PCI can give you a seriously misleading picture if you're aiming for real development for better lives.
Exactly. And that realization that we needed a broader view is what led to things like the Human Development Index, the HDI. It combines PCI with education levels and life expectancy. It tries to capture that multidimensional picture Tadaro was talking about.
Makes sense. Now, a lot of this discussion inherently focuses on less developed countries, LDCs. What are the typical features we see in these economies that make development such a challenge?
Yeah, there's a common cluster of characteristics. Often you see very low per capita income, obviously linked with widespread poverty. The UN used to have a benchmark, something like under $750 PCI, though that changes.
And structurally?
A huge dependence on agriculture. Often, 70% or even more of the workforce is in farming, and frequently it's not very productive, subsistence farming.
Which leads to labor problems.
Big time. Massive unemployment, but also underemployment, people working fewer hours than they want, and something called disguised unemployment. That's where you have people on the farm, for example, who look busy but aren't actually adding anything to the output. If they left, production wouldn't fall. Wow. And this ties into generally low levels of productivity overall, partly because the workforce might lack education and skills. Then there's often underutilized natural resources, paradoxically, and high dependency ratios because of rapid population growth.
And one more thing often mentioned is dualism. What's that?
Dualism. It's like having two economies in one country. You'll have a small modern sector, maybe manufacturing, finance that's connected to the global economy, uses money, is relatively productive. And alongside it, a huge traditional, often rural agricultural sector that might still rely heavily on barter, uses primitive techniques, and has very low productivity. They exist side by side, but aren't well integrated.
It really sounds like a set of interlocking problems, almost like a trap, which brings us right to this idea of the vicious circle of poverty.
The ultimate development trap? Ragnar Nurks nailed it with that phrase. A country is poor because it is poor.
It sounds like a circular argument, but there's real logic behind it, right?
Okay.
How does this cycle work?
It operates on both the supply side and the demand side of capital, which is key to breaking out. Let's look at the supply side first. It starts with low income. Because people have low incomes, they have a very low capacity to save. Can't save much if you're barely surviving.
Okay, low savings.
Means low investment in new capital goods, factories, machines, etc. Low investment leads to low productivity because you don't have the tools and infrastructure. And low productivity, of course, leads right back to low income. Round and round it goes. It limits the supply of capital.
A really nasty feedback loop. What about the demand side? Is it just as bad?
Just as bad, yeah. It reinforces the trap. Start with low production levels, which often means low employment and therefore low purchasing power among the general population.
People don't have money to buy things.
Exactly. So you have low effective demand in the market overall. If the market is small and potential customers are poor, entrepreneurs aren't incentivized to make new investments because who are they going to sell to? This lack of investment keeps production low, employment low, incomes low. Another vicious circle, this time limiting the demand for capital.
So trapped by both lack of supply of savings and lack of demand from consumers, How on earth do you break out?
Narksi argued, and most agree, you have to somehow make capital accumulation grow faster than the population. It usually requires a really large-scale coordinated effort, a big push, to break that low-level equilibrium.
Which is where the big economic models come in, trying to offer blueprints for exactly that kind of strategy. Let's touch on a few key ones. First up, Domar. That feels foundational.
It is very influential early model. The core idea is that the economy's growth rate depends on two main things: the level of saving as a proportion of income, and K, the capital output ratio.
That's how much capital you need to produce 1 unit of output.
Precisely. How efficient your capital is. The basic formula is simple. The growth rate, let's call it Y, equals S divided by K, Y equals SK. It highlights the dual role of investment. It creates income now, and it increases future productive capacity by adding to the capital stock.
So for a developing country, the lesson seems obvious.
Yeah.
Boost your savings rate and try to lower your capital output ratio, maybe through better technology or efficiency.
That's the policy implication exactly. But Domar is also famous for this rather worrying concept, the knife edge. What's that about?
It sounds precarious. It is precarious. The model suggests that maintaining steady, stable growth is incredibly difficult. It identifies 3 growth rates: the actual rate, the warranted rate that keeps entrepreneurs happy, and the natural rate, allowed by population and technology growth. For smooth sailing, all 3 need to be equal.
And if they're not, if the actual growth rate deviates even slightly from this perfect balance, the economy tends to spiral away cumulatively, either towards chronic depression or runaway inflation. It suggests stable growth is inherently unstable, balanced on a knife edge, very hard to manage.
Okay, a bit scary. Now, the Salo model came later and offered a different perspective, right?
Oh.
It brought in technology more explicitly.
Yes, Salo built on Domar, but added a crucial element: diminishing returns to capital. He argued that while adding more capital boosts growth initially, eventually each additional machine or factory adds less and less output.
So just piling up capital isn't a long-term solution.
Not for sustained growth per capita, according to Salo. Once you reach a steady state where capital investment just covers depreciation and equips new workers, growth per person flatlines unless you have technological progress. In the long run, Salo says improvements in technology making better use of both capital and labor are the only source of sustained increases in living standards.
That makes technology sound absolutely critical. Does the Salo model offer any hope for poorer countries?
It does, actually, through the idea of catch-up growth or convergence. Because poor countries start with very little capital per worker, the returns on the first bits of investment should be really hot, much higher than in rich countries that are already saturated with capital.
So they should grow faster.
Theoretically, yes. They should grow faster and gradually close the gap with richer countries, assuming they can access and adopt the same technologies.
Interesting. Okay, another perspective comes from Joan Robinson's model. It shifts the focus again, this time to income distribution.
That's right. Robinson connected capital formation directly to how income is divided between wages and profits. She made some stark assumptions to make the point clear. Workers spend everything they earn, zero saving, while capitalists, entrepreneurs, save and invest all their profits.
So profits are the only source of investment funds in her model.
Exactly. Therefore, the rate of capital accumulation depends entirely on the share of total income going to profits and the propensity of capitalists to reinvest those profits.
What's the problem this highlights for developing countries?
The big issue arises if the labor force is growing faster than the capital stock. If population outpaces investment, then capital per worker falls, productivity falls, and you risk falling into stagnation or depression.
So you need to keep capital growing at least as fast as the population.
Precisely. To avoid trouble, the capital stock needs to be constantly enlarged. Robinson talked about a golden age equilibrium, this ideal state of smooth, steady growth with full employment. It happens when the growth rate of the population equals the growth rate of capital, GN in GK. Achieving that, especially when population growth is high, often requires deliberate planning and intervention.
Okay, so we have models focusing on savings, technology, distribution. But how do you actually implement a strategy? There's this classic debate, balanced growth versus unbalanced growth.
Yes, a fundamental strategic choice. The balanced growth school, associated with people like Nurks and Rosenstein-Rodan, argues for a big push. Their logic is tied to that vicious circle, especially the small market size on the demand side.
Right, nobody invests because nobody can buy.
So the solution, they argued, is simultaneous coordinated investment across a wide range of industries: agriculture, manufacturing, infrastructure, everything all at once. The idea is that workers in the new shoe factory buy the clothes from the new textile mill, and vice versa. You create your own market.
It creates demand internally.
Exactly. They argued that investing bit by bit in isolated projects is often a waste because they'll fail due to lack of demand or inputs. You need that critical mass.
But the obvious objection is, where does a poor country get the massive resources for a big push across the board? It sounds almost impossible.
That's the main criticism, and it leads directly to the unbalanced growth strategy, championed by Albert Hirschman and Hans Singer. They said, look, resources are scarce, especially managerial and decision-making capacity, so forget trying to do everything at once.
What's the alternative?
Concentrate your limited investment resources in a few carefully chosen strategic sectors. Pick industries that have strong linkages forward and backward to other parts of economy.
So investing in steel might stimulate coal mining, backward linkage, and also car manufacturing, forward linkage.
Something like that. Hirschman had this really interesting idea that development isn't smooth. It's inherently a chain of disequilibria. You deliberately unbalance the economy.
Create bottlenecks and shortages on purpose.
Well, maybe not on purpose, but you accept them as part of the process. You create tensions. Investing heavily in one sector creates shortages or new demands elsewhere, which then creates pressure and incentives for further investment to relieve those bottlenecks. Development pulls itself along, chain reacting.
How would you deliberately unbalance things?
Hirschman talked about two main paths, focusing on the relationship between the social overhead capital, SOC, basic infrastructure like roads, power, ports, and directly productive activities, DPA, factories, farms, the things that make saleable goods.
Okay.
You could go for development via excess capacity of SOC. Build the roads and power plants first, maybe more than immediately needed. This creates low-cost infrastructure that then invites private DPA investment to come in and use it.
Or the other way around.
Or development via shortage of SOC. Let DPA investments go ahead first, build the factories. This will inevitably lead to power shortages, congested roads, etc. The public outcry and the visible bottlenecks then create strong pressure on the government to invest in the necessary SOC to catch up. Both paths use imbalance to drive further steps.
Fascinating. Two very different philosophies on how to kickstart the engine. Okay, let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground. The big takeaway seems to be this crucial split. Growth is quantitative scale. Development is qualitative, structural transformation.
That's the heart of it. Growth is about the size of the economy, often measured by income. Development is about the quality of life, reducing poverty, increasing opportunities, changing the very structure of society, measured by much broader indicators than just income.
And regardless of the specific model, whether you focus on savings like Herod Domar, technology like Solo, distribution like Robinson, or strategy like balanced versus unbalanced, the common thread seems to be
the absolute necessity of accelerated capital formation. To break that vicious circle of poverty, you fundamentally need to build up your stock of productive capital, physical and human, faster than your population is growing. That seems to be the prerequisite for getting onto a sustainable development path.
right. But let's leave our listeners with a final thought, something to chew on, maybe building on everything we discussed. The models give us these economic mechanisms, savings, technology, investment ratios. But we also touched on those non-economic factors way back at the start, social structures, government policies, maybe even cultural attitudes.
The context that determines the rate of growth.
Exactly. So if the ultimate goal isn't just growth, but real lasting development, how much does success really depend on getting those economic formulas right versus reforming the underlying social and institutional structures? Is there an institutional, a sort of societal efficiency factor that's maybe even more critical than the purely financial K in determining long-term success?
That's a deep question. How much is it about the investment plan, and how much is it about the society's ability to actually execute it and make it work for everyone? Something to ponder.